Howdy. There's a place called Blackwater Draw, and it's located between Clovis, New Mexico and Portales, New Mexico. In the late 1920s, there was a young man, 19 years old, from Clovis, named Ridgely Whitmire, who wrote to the Smithsonian Institution that he thought he had found ancient elephant bones and what he called warheads that had been exposed in the Blackwater Draw. Blackwater Draw was an ancient shallow water lake that had dried up many thousands of years ago. But at one time, Blackwater Draw had natural springs. It was a spring-fed lake, and then that lake flowed into a place called, I believe, Yellow House Canyon near Lubbock. Anyways, it became the headwaters for the Brazos River. At one time, this is where the Brazos River started, Blackwater Draw. He got really no response from the Smithsonian, and a few years later there was another archaeologist that was working in the area who was doing some investigation into caves in the Guadalupe Mountains, and the investigations in this area by archaeologists at this time had increased dramatically since the discovery of Folsom era tools, what they wound up calling Folsom tools, near Folsom, New Mexico, where they had found a certain really distinct type of spearhead, and they had found it with some extinct bison species, the bones from these bison antiquus. So they knew that the timeline was moving deeper and deeper into history for people being in the Americas, and they thought maybe there was more evidence in this area of that. So when this archaeologist, who was already looking for stuff there and had hired a couple of guys from Carlsbad, New Mexico to help him, heard about Blackwater Draw, he went to take a look and immediately became interested. And they started excavations in, I believe, 1932 or 33 in Blackwater Draw, what became known as Blackwater Draw Locality Number 1. So they started doing dating, and they started doing these excavations, and they found out that people had used this as basically a hunting camp for thousands and thousands of years. They kept finding, deeper and deeper they would go. They would keep finding artifacts and keep finding bones of butchered animals, from modern day animals back to extinct species, bison antiquus, Columbian mammoths. They found, so by the time they dated these, they went back about 13,500 years. Now this was at a time when they were, first off, the Smithsonian for a long time claimed that people had only been in the Americas for about 5,000 years. That was it. And then that got pushed back to about 8,000 once they started being able to radiocarbon date things. Then when the Folsom discovery happened, they said, "Whoa, that was at least 11,000 years ago." So then it was 11,000 years. Now you had Clovis, which was another distinct point style, and it went back 13,500 years before present. So this is right at the end of the last ice age. The climate was a lot cooler, a lot wetter. There were a lot of megafauna alive at that time. We're talking, the giant Columbian mammoths, the bison antiquus that are the short-faced cave bear, saber-toothed cats. These were all roaming around at that time, and this was a major watering hole for that wildlife. There was they found in one of the springs a broken mammoth tusk, where they think that once the water had started drying out, this mammoth had tried to dig down in the spring to get to get to the water, and by sticking his tusk in the spring and trying to dig the dirt out of the way, and he broken a big piece of his tusk off into the spring. They think that's what happened. So they were just finding all kinds of incredible things out there at Blackwater Draw. Well, then the state of New Mexico decided they needed a road between Portales and Clovis, and there was a gravel mining operation that, lo and behold, started right in the lake bed. So archaeologists were, wait a minute, you know, we got more stuff, and the mining people were like, yeah, we need the gravel. So guess who won that? But they were able to get enough out of there to document, like I said, this Clovis culture. It was the first place that they documented Clovis culture. There was all kinds of history and things they were able to document just because of the remains, what had been left. The bones were right alongside with the stone tools. There were no stones in that area. There was gravel, okay, for building a road, I guess. There were no tools that were proper, or stone, excuse me, that was proper for making tools. Most of the tools that they found came from stone that was from either central Texas or northern Texas, up in the Panhandle, a place that I'm going to talk about in another video. The Alabates Flint Quarry, another fascinating place. The other type of stone was what they would call Edwards Chert. I'll show you some Edwards Chert. Give me just a minute. Okay, this is a piece of Edwards Chert. Now, you can see it's got this sort of coating over it, but in the middle there's this gray stone. And when they were making these tools, they would look for a piece, now referred to sometimes as a blank, or, you know, but they would look for a piece about as big as your fist, a little bigger than that maybe. So maybe just a little bit bigger than this piece. And then they could take what was called a hammerstone, or what we call a hammerstone, and knock big flakes off of this. And then those flakes could be formed into tools. And they were experts at this. This was their livelihood. I mean, there must have been people in these within these communities of Native Americans that were just absolute stone experts. Some of the stuff they make is incredible. I mean, you get down into Mexico, or, you know, and look at some of the stonework that the Mayas and the Incas and the Aztecs did down there. It's incredible. We're talking Machu Picchu, we're talking the Mayan pyramids, we're talking, you know, all that, the Inca pyramids. So the stonework from these people was incredible. Here I have a thing I found years and years ago that I've hung on to. That is a finished piece of Edwards Chert, what it'll look like. You can see how thin it is. Anyways, let's look at the other side. This is what they call a biface. It's done on both faces, and then you can even see the detail that they took when they went around the edge of it and made an edge. The edge is so thin, when I hold it up to the light, it's almost transparent. So, anyways, that's what a finished piece of Edwards Chert would look like. So, and that's not a Clovis point, by the way. It's way newer than that. That's maybe 3,000, 4,000 years old. The Clovis points were very distinctive. They were fluted at one end, about halfway up usually, so that they would attach easily to a spear handle. The spear was the main weapon these people were using back then. They didn't have bows and arrows yet, so you don't find arrowheads mainly from this era. You find spearheads, you find blades, you find other stone tools. But so they were. A Columbian mammoth is a huge animal. You're talking way bigger than an African elephant today, with huge tusks. There's a place in Waco, Texas, the Waco Mammoth National Monument, where they found a whole nursery herd that all died at the same time, they think in a flash flood, similar to what happened in Kerrville a few weeks ago. So they found all these mammoths, Columbian mammoths. They think they're 25,000 years old or something like that, that were stuck in the same place. There was just several of them, babies, mothers, whatnot. They're huge. They're absolutely huge. And these people were hunting these mammoths with spears, with a sharpened rock tied to the end of a big stick. And they were experts at it. I mean, so that the butcher marks and the stone tools that are in the same place as the mammoth bones leave no room for error. These people considered mammoths a food source. They hunted them. There's theories about how the mammoth they would wound the mammoth that was in the area, and then it would wander down, to the water when it was wounded, because that's just was nature of the beast. And then once the thing laid down or whatever, they could kill it and butcher it to eat it. So there were these hunting camps around Blackwater Draw. These were old, very old. They hunted mammoths. They were expert hunters and expert tool makers when it came to making stone tools. And they've found some new camps at Blackwater. When I went to Blackwater Draw, I talked to some people. There's a university in Portales, New Mexico, and they have an archaeology program there. They also have a Blackwater Draw museum there. I went to the Blackwater Draw museum and was able to talk to one of the students who was working in the museum, and they said they think they found a new camp out at Blackwater Draw. They were doing some excavations out there over the summer. I think they've wrapped up the summer excavations. Maybe they're going to take them up again in the fall. I don't know. I know that a lot of the people working on those excavations now are students and archaeology students and stuff. And a lot of them go home for the summer, so I think they've put it off for now, and they'll pick them up again in the fall, more than likely, when they return to school. The reason Blackwater Draw became so interesting was because they were looking for something that they thought they could find more Folsom era, which was about 11,000 years ago, sites. They were once they found the Folsom, they said there's got to be more older sites in this area. So archaeologists from all over the United States were looking for these sites, and they were concentrating on New Mexico. Then they found this site, went back 13,500 years, the Clovis site. Now there's hundreds of Clovis sites that have been found across the United States. In fact, the majority of Clovis sites are actually east of the Mississippi River. The East Coast has a lot more Clovis sites that have been discovered than the West Coast does. So this was a widespread culture of people. They traded back and forth. They had trade routes. They traveled. A lot of them, followed the food. It's not believed that they were doing any type of farming, but they were harvesting what they could at certain times of the year. So they knew a certain time of year, certain plants produced certain foods. That may be part of their travel plans. They go one way in the summer, one way in the winter. So, and then in between they had these camps where they knew they could depend on food. Sometimes these camps, they would find what they call caches buried, where they had taken a bunch of stone tools, blanks, stone to be made into tools, and they would actually hide it there and bury it so they didn't have to carry so much, the next year when they came back. So they find these caches just about everywhere. Oh, some people think that's why. Some people say, well, they think it might have something to do with some kind of ceremonial thing where they bury tools to be an offering for who knows. But they do find large quantities of these caches. If you find a Clovis cache, that's something else. They found a couple of those in Texas. So the thought is, my thinking on it is, now when I went and I visited the site, I noticed right at the bottom of the dig, I've got videos I took in the dig and pictures I took in the dig. They stopped when they hit sand that they thought was the bottom of the spring, or the beginning of the spring, excuse me, not the bottom. So they call that spring sand, and then they just stopped. They said, okay, well, this was the old water level, so we're not going to find anything below that. Water levels fluctuate. They go up, they go down. During drought periods, shallow lakes have a tendency to dry up. During wet periods, they have a tendency to fill. So, in my opinion, and I'm not an archaeologist or a geologist, I'm just a guy who likes to read about this stuff. In my opinion, they should have kept going. Go down another, 4 or 5 feet, see if there's anything there. And the reason I say this now, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but this all gets tied into recent discoveries at White Sands. White Sands is over the mountains from Clovis, but they found footprints there that they're saying are 23,000 years old, and they have confirmed that with 4 different types of tests to determine the age that were sent to 4 different laboratories, and each of those laboratories did confirmation. So you've got all this confirmation about these old footprints in White Sands. So now we know people were in New Mexico 23,000 years ago. This is at the last glacial maximum. There were cliffs of ice in the northern United States that were over 1 kilometer tall. All of Canada was buried under ice. All of Alaska was buried under ice. There's no way that people came down from the north to get to New Mexico 22,000 years ago. Not possible. So we're talking about, if they're right about these were hunter-gatherer people that were in New Mexico that many millennia ago, then they had to come from the south. I mean, there's just if that's what they're saying, these people didn't have the ability to make a watercraft that could cross an ocean, so they had to come up from the south. They still had to get there somehow, but I don't know. Or there were people here 20,000 years ago who had the ability to travel an ocean. That's really what we're left with at this point. It's one of the two. So we'll dig into that a little bit more in another video. Next, I'm going to take you up to Alabate's Flint Quarry in the Panhandle of Texas and share with you some bizarre things I captured on camera there. And I don't know, maybe you can tell me what it is. So that'll be in the next video. We'll see you then. Take it easy and try to have a good day,